Just before the story starts, wherever you are on your journey, consider this your sign to keep going. The grocery store smelled like floor wax and old bread, the particular smell of places that have never been renovated and never will be. A single fluorescent tube above aisle 4 blinked in a slow, arrhythmic pulse, as if even the light was exhausted. It was 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, and the store was mostly empty. A retired woman slowly pushing her cart near the dairy section. A teenager restocking chips with the enthusiasm of someone serving a prison sentence, and Adam Wheeler standing at register 1, his 5-year-old daughter Maya holding his left hand with both of hers, her fingers interlaced through his the way children do when they sense something their words can't name. Adam was 38 years old and looked 46, not in a broken way, in the way of a man who had spent years outdoors, working with his hands, carrying things heavier than his body should have been asked to carry. His jaw was clean-shaved that morning. He had made sure of that. There were certain things a man could still control, even when everything else was slipping, and a clean face was one of them. His flannel shirt was old but pressed. His boots were scuffed but laced tight. He was the kind of man who still tried even when trying cost him something. On the belt in front of him, a box of oatmeal, a quart of whole milk, a small pack of chicken thighs, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, a bunch of bananas, and one small container of strawberry yogurt. Maya's. He had added that last when she wasn't looking, sliding it onto the belt with the quiet, deliberate care of a man placing a bet he cannot afford, but cannot bring himself to fold. He had done the math 3 times in the car. He was $7.40 short, maybe $8 depending on tax. His wallet held a single $20 bill and a gas receipt. He had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. He had told Maya he wasn't hungry at breakfast, that he'd eaten early. She had believed him, as 5-year-olds believe most things their fathers tell them, which is both the sweetest and the most painful thing about being a father at all. The cashier was a woman named Linda, mid-50s, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, fingers moving with the automated efficiency of someone who had been scanning groceries since before the internet existed. She did not look up as Adam unloaded his items. She scanned the oatmeal, the milk, the chicken, the bread. The register beeped its indifferent little beep each time. Maya watched the conveyor belt move with the focused intensity that children bring to mechanical things, her eyes tracking each item as it slid toward Linda's hands. She was wearing her yellow raincoat even though it wasn't raining. She wore it most days now. She had decided at some point that it was her favorite thing, and Adam had stopped arguing. Pick your battles. That was the whole of parenting, distilled down. Pick your battles, and give up the ones that don't matter so you have something left for the ones that do. Linda scanned the peanut butter, the bananas, the yogurt. Then she looked up at the small screen and said the total. $27.18. Adam did not react immediately. He reached into his back pocket and produced his wallet. He took out the 20. He looked inside for the other bills he knew were not there. The gesture of a man going through ritual motions. The way you check a pocket twice for keys you already know aren't in it. Then he looked up at Linda. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned to keep things quiet and controlled because the alternative was a door he did not trust himself to open. "I'm a little short. I'm about $7 short." He paused. "Is there any chance I could pay you back Thursday? I have a check coming Thursday." Linda looked at him. Not unkindly, but not with warmth either. The look of someone consulting a policy they didn't write but have to enforce. She glanced at the line behind him. 3 people now. A young man in a business suit, an older woman with a full cart, a delivery driver in a yellow vest, and she said, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't do that. Store policy." "I understand," Adam said. We've been coming in here for 2 years. I'm not trying to take anything. I'll be back Thursday with the full amount. I give you my word." Linda's eyes moved to the phone on the wall. That small, instinctive glance. Adam saw it. He had been a man long enough to recognize the movement. She was deciding whether to call the manager. That glance was the dividing line between a quiet resolution and something else entirely. And they both knew it. "Daddy," Maya said softly, looking up at him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said his name, or the word that meant his name in the private language of small children. And in that single syllable, there was more weight than the whole transaction. The business suit behind him exhaled loudly. Not words, just breath, expelled in a way that communicated everything. I don't have time for this. I don't want to be part of this. Move along. The older woman with the cart made a small sound of sympathy that somehow made things worse. The delivery driver looked at his phone, and then the manager arrived. His name was Gerald Holt, and he was the kind of man who had spent so long administering small authority that he had forgotten it was small. He was pink-faced, 44, and moved with the brisk self-importance of someone responding to a genuine emergency rather than a $7 shortfall at Register 1. He positioned himself beside Linda with his arms crossed and looked at Adam, the way men like Gerald look at men like Adam, not with cruelty, but with a professional detachment that might have been worse. The detachment of someone who has already categorized you. What's the problem here, Gerald said, though Linda had clearly already told him. Adam told him again quietly with the same words, the same tone. He gave his name. He mentioned the 2 years. He mentioned Thursday. He kept his voice level. Maya had moved slightly behind his leg now, one hand still holding his, her forehead resting against his thigh. Gerald looked at the belt, looked at the total on the screen, looked at Adam. Sir, we can't extend credit, he said. You can put some items back if you need to. Then he added, not viciously, but with a casual thoughtlessness that cut precisely because of how casual it was. It happens. Nothing to be embarrassed about. The man in the business suit made a sound like a laugh, quickly suppressed. The older woman with the cart looked away. Adam said nothing. He stood very still for a moment, the stillness of a man who has been trained to absorb impact without showing the impact has landed. And then he reached for the yogurt. The strawberry yogurt. Maya's. He picked it up gently and placed it back on the belt. On the wrong side, the return side, and said quietly to Linda, You can take that off. Maya watched the yogurt leave. She said nothing. She was 5, but she understood. Children always understand more than we want them to. In the back of the store, near the last shelf of the organic section, a young woman stood holding a bottle of sparkling water she had no intention of buying. She had been standing there for 4 minutes. She had watched the whole thing. Her name was Natalie Voss, and she was 29 years old, and she was worth, by the last accounting she had paid someone to do, somewhere north of $40 million. She was wearing a coat that cost more than Adam's monthly rent had been. 18 months ago, before the rent became irrelevant because he could no longer pay it. She watched Adam pick up his bags, fewer items now, the yogurt gone, the math revised, and she watched Maya reach up and take his hand again, and she watched Adam look down at his daughter with an expression that was, in its quiet way, the most heartbreaking thing Natalie had seen in a long time. Not self-pity, not shame. Something harder than both of those things. A man looking at his child and deciding, for the 100th time that morning alone, to hold. Then Natalie noticed his hands. She noticed them the way someone notices something they were not expecting to, with a small internal adjustment. A recalibration. Adam's hands were not simply the hands of a man who had fallen on hard times. They were calloused in specific places, precise in their roughness. The particular wear of someone trained in detail work, not just labor. The right hand had a faint scar along the outer edge, clean and straight. The kind of scar that comes when you know exactly what you're doing and something goes wrong anyway. Natalie had grown up around men with hands like that. She knew what those hands meant. And she had a feeling, not a certainty, just a feeling, that Gerald Holt had just humiliated a man he did not remotely understand. Adam Wheeler walked out of the store into the thin October light, his daughter at his side, his groceries in one hand, his dignity intact in the way only those who nearly lost theirs can recognize. He did not look back at Linda, did not look at Gerald Holt, did not acknowledge the man in the business suit. He had made a practice over 2 years of not looking back at the places where he had been diminished. Looking back was a form of dwelling, and dwelling was something he could not afford any more than he could afford the yogurt. You kept moving. You kept your eyes front. You held your child's hand and walked out into the cold and did not let her feel the ground even when the ground was directly beneath your feet. That was the job. Right here. This was the job. But as the door closed behind him inside the store, Natalie Voss set down the sparkling water she had never intended to buy. She had learned not to let the second kind walk out of sight without at least trying. And Adam Wheeler, she thought with a certainty she could not yet fully justify, was the second kind. Adam's truck was a 2004 Ford F-150, the color of weathered rust, a vehicle that had long since passed the point where it could be fixed in any cosmetic sense, and was being maintained now purely on mechanical stubbornness and the kind of expertise that comes from necessity. He had rebuilt the carburetor himself 18 months ago. In the parking lot of the apartment complex they could no longer afford, Maya sitting on the tailgate eating crackers and asking questions he answered honestly when he could, and deflected gently when he couldn't. The heater worked. The brakes were solid. The rest was beside the point. He strapped Maya into her car seat in the back. She had outgrown the infant seat 2 years ago, but the booster they used now was still the one her grandmother had bought before the grandmother stopped calling, and Adam kept it meticulously clean in the same way he kept the truck meticulously functional, because there were things a man owed his child regardless of what the month looked like. He checked the buckle twice. He smoothed her collar. She was already looking out the window, watching a pigeon investigate something near the curb. "Daddy," she said, not turning from the window. "Yeah, bug. Can pigeons smell things?" He thought about it. "I think so. Not as well as dogs." "How do you know?" "I read it somewhere." He hadn't. He was guessing. But it was a reasonable guess, and sometimes reasonable guesses were what fatherhood required. "I'm going to name that one," Maya said. "Franklin." "Good name," Adam said. He closed her door carefully, the way you close the door on something precious, and walked around to the driver's side and sat down and put his hands on the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Just a moment. Just enough to be somewhere private. His jaw was tight. He breathed through his nose slowly, the way a man breathes when he is refusing to do the other thing. Then he turned the key, and Franklin the pigeon flew away, and they drove home. Home was a one-bedroom unit in a complex called Sunrise Gardens, which had neither sunrises nor gardens worth mentioning, but did have low monthly rent and a landlord named Darnell who had quietly allowed Adam 2 weeks' grace on 3 of the last 5 months without ever making it a conversation. Darnell was one of the good ones. There were good ones everywhere. If you paid attention. Adam paid attention. It was something his father had taught him before the teaching stopped. The world is full of quiet decency, son. Most of it never makes the news. That doesn't make it less real. The unit had 1 bedroom, which was Maya's. Adam slept on a pull-out couch that he folded back every morning and unfolded every night with the mechanical regularity of a man who understood that maintaining the form of a thing was how you kept the thing from collapsing entirely. The couch had a bar in the middle that pressed into his lower back. He had adapted to it the way the body adapts to discomfort when the discomfort is non-negotiable, by redistributing, by compensating, by sleeping slightly to the left. He had not told Maya he slept on the couch. She thought the bedroom was hers because she was a kid and kids needed space, which was true, but it was not the whole truth. On the wall of Maya's bedroom there were 3 drawings she had made at preschool, tacked up with the blue painter's tape Adam used for everything because it didn't damage walls, and he intended to get his deposit back. The drawings were in order: a house with a sun behind it, a dog that looked like a potato with legs, and a figure clearly meant to be Adam, tall and thin with exaggerated hands. Maya had drawn the hands large on purpose. She had told him so. "Because your hands are the biggest," she'd said. "They fix things." He had looked at that drawing for a long time the night she brought it home. He had stood in the doorway of her room after she was asleep and looked at the thing she had made of him, this tall, large-handed figure standing in front of the house with the sun behind it. And he had felt something move through him that he couldn't quite name. Not pride exactly, not sadness exactly, not something that sat between the two like a bridge over a river that ran in both directions at once. Adam had been a structural engineer for 11 years. Not a famous one. There were no famous ones outside of certain circles. But a good one. Exceptionally good by the assessment of the people who measured such things. He had specialized in seismic retrofitting, the work of going into old buildings and making them capable of surviving what they were not built to survive. It required a particular kind of thinking, understanding where the weakness lived, not in the obvious places but in the hidden ones, the connections and joints and load paths that looked solid until they weren't. He had been good at finding those. He had been good at the kind of patience that kind of work required. He had lost the job 22 months ago when the firm collapsed, not because of anything Adam had done, but because the senior partners had made decisions in rooms Adam was not invited to, and the results landed the way results always land on people below the line of decision-making. Completely and without warning. One Tuesday afternoon, an email. The firm was dissolving. His final paycheck would be mailed. There was no paycheck. He had kept that information from his mother for 3 months, and from his ex-wife for 2, before the ex-wife stopped being a factor in any practical sense and his mother started having her own problems. Maya had been 3 then, almost 4, still in diapers at night, still reaching for his hand when they walked anywhere the way children do, before they learned that reaching for a hand is a thing that can be taken from you. He had thought initially that it would take 3 months to find another position. Then 6. Then a year passed and the industry had contracted and the certifications he had were right, but the years he had were wrong. Too old for the junior roles they were filling at new rates, too expensive for the senior ones they weren't filling at all. He had driven for a rideshare company for 8 months. He had done demolition work for a contractor named Pete, who paid cash and asked no questions. He had worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse for 6 weeks, coming home at 6 in the morning to make Maya's breakfast before her preschool bus arrived, then sleeping from 8 until noon on the pull-out couch. He had not complained about any of this. There was no one to complain to, and more importantly, nothing to be gained by it. Complaining was a luxury for people who had someone to hear it. There was a photograph on the kitchen windowsill in a small plastic frame, cracked in one corner from a time Maya had knocked it off the counter, repaired with super glue and a steady hand. The photograph showed Adam at 27 in work gear, standing on the steel skeleton of a building under construction, 3 stories up on an exposed beam, one hand resting on a column, the other hanging relaxed at his side, looking at the camera with the particular calm confidence of a man who knows exactly where he is and exactly what he's doing. Below him, the city. Behind him, the open sky. Maya had asked about the photograph once. Adam had told her he used to build buildings. She had looked at the photo for a long time and then looked at her father and then looked at the photo again, making the calculation that children make, matching the person in the image with the person in the room, deciding how much of each was real. "You were very high up," she said finally. "I was," Adam agreed. "Were you scared?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "Not up there." She had accepted this. She did not ask the obvious follow-up question, "Then where?" Because she was 5, and the obvious follow-up questions take years to arrive. But Adam had heard it anyway, in the silence where it should have been, and he had thought, "Here. I'm scared here. In the low places. In the ordinary ones. Not on the beam. Never on the beam." That afternoon, after the grocery store, after the yogurt, after Gerald Holt's flat administrative kindness that was somehow more degrading than outright contempt, Adam sat at the small table in the kitchen while Maya napped and looked at the check from the labor agency that had arrived in the mail that morning. It was for a 3-day demolition job completed 9 days ago, and it was, as he had told Linda, enough to cover the groceries and a week's worth of other things. But it was not Thursday. It was Tuesday, and the store had been the store. He looked at the check for a long time. It was not a large amount. It was, by most standards, a very small amount. The kind of amount that people who have never needed it would describe as not much, while people who have needed it know the precise weight of, the way you know the weight of anything you have carried across a long distance. From Maya's room he could hear the small sounds of her sleeping, the occasional murmur, the sound of her turning. And he sat with those sounds the way a man sits with the only music he has left, and he thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest thing to peace he had access to at the moment. And he was thinking about nothing when his phone buzzed on the table with a number he did not recognize. He almost didn't answer. Calls from unknown numbers had meant nothing good for months. But something, Instinct, or the particular recklessness of a man who had already absorbed everything the day had, made him pick up. "Hello." The voice was a woman's. Young, steady, already accustomed to people paying attention when she spoke. "Mr. Wheeler," she said. "My name is Natalie Voss. We were in the same grocery store this morning. I'd like to speak with you." Adam did not ask her how she had gotten his number. He asked it later. In his mind, but during the conversation itself, he did not ask. Partly because she moved past the natural pauses where questions are inserted, and partly because some part of him recognized that the structural logic of the call had already been established before he said a word. She was not calling to ask something. She was calling to say something. He had always been good at reading load paths. "I was in the store this morning," she said. "I saw what happened." "Okay," Adam said. "I want to be clear about something first. I'm not calling out of pity." She said this directly, without apology, as though she had already considered how the call might be received and decided the only way forward was to address the most likely obstacle immediately. "I'm calling because I noticed something and I want to follow up on it. If you're not interested, you can say so now and I won't call again." Adam was quiet for a moment. Through the wall, he could hear Maya shifting in her sleep. "What did you notice?" he said. "Your hands," Natalie said, "and the way you carried yourself, and the photograph in your wallet when you opened it." She paused. "The building, the beam. I recognize the structure. It's the Hennessy Center on 4th. I own the building next to it." Adam said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "You own the Carlyle?" Because that was the building next to the Hennessy Center on 4th. And it was a 4-story mixed-use structure built in 1962 that he knew very well, because he had done a seismic assessment on it in 2018, under his own professional seal, for a client whose name he had signed a confidentiality agreement not to disclose. And the client's name had been Voss. "The Carlyle," she confirmed. They agreed to meet the next morning at a coffee shop on Birch Street. Adam arrived 8 minutes early and chose a table with his back to the wall, facing the door, without thinking about it, the way he did most things that had once been trained into him, automatically without announcement. He ordered black coffee and paid from the check he'd cashed on the way, which left him a specific amount already allocated in his head. The subtraction of the coffee he noted and accepted. Natalie Voss arrived at exactly the agreed time. She was shorter than she had seemed in the store and dressed simply. Dark jacket, plain trousers, the kind of simplicity that costs money to achieve. She did not look like what she was. She carried a slim leather folder. She ordered green tea and sat across from him, and looked at him with an attention that was direct without being rude, the look of someone who had learned to see past the surface of things. "Adam Wheeler," she said, opening the folder. "Structural engineering license, State of California, obtained 2007. Certification in seismic design and retrofit, 2009. 17 years of professional work, the last 11 with Carter Brigham Structural before they dissolved in 2022. She looked up. "You signed the assessment on the Carlyle. I read it twice when my attorney gave it to me. It was the most thorough assessment I had seen on any property in 8 years of acquisitions. I told my attorney at the time, whoever wrote this, they see the building the way the building actually is, not the way it looks." Adam kept his face still. "What is it you want, Ms. Voss?" "I have 4 properties that need structural assessments. 3 of them have assessments on file, but they were done by firms I no longer trust after an incident I won't detail. The 4th is a new acquisition, a 1948 commercial building on the east side that everyone tells me is solid, but that I have a feeling about." She paused. "A feeling I take seriously. You want to hire me as a consultant?" "I want to hire you as a consultant," she confirmed. "Full rate, professional seal, and if the work is what I expect it to be, there would be additional projects beyond these 4. Adam looked at his coffee. He had learned over 22 months to be careful about the space between what he needed and what he wanted, because collapsing that distance led to decisions made from the wrong place. He needed the work. He needed the income. He needed almost exactly what was being offered. But need was not sufficient reason to agree to anything. The person who agrees immediately is always working from weakness. The person who asks questions first is working from strength, regardless of the actual balance of power. "Why didn't you just leave a note on my truck?" he asked. Or ask the manager for my information. A beat. Or buy the yogurt and leave it at that. Something changed slightly in Natalie's expression. Not softening exactly, more like a recognition. I thought about the yogurt, she said. For about 30 seconds. I thought about buying it and catching you in the parking lot. And then I realized that that's what someone does when they want to feel good about themselves for an afternoon. She looked at him steadily. I'm not interested in feeling good about myself for an afternoon. I'm interested in making a business decision that I think is correct. Those are different things. Adam studied her. She was 29 or so, he guessed. Younger than he'd initially thought, with the older seeming composure of someone who had moved through difficulty of a different kind. The kind that comes with money rather than the absence of it, which was its own education. He did not fully trust her yet. He did not fully distrust her. He held both, as he had learned to hold most things at a slight remove. I'd need to see the properties, he said, before I agree to anything, and I'd need to operate under my own seal, my own standards. I don't adjust findings to match what someone wants to hear. I know, she said. That's why I'm here. He had not told her about Maya. He did not tell people about Maya, not in professional contexts, not in early ones. Maya was the center of his life, and also the most protected part of it. He kept her separate from the machinery of survival the way you keep the most important component of a structure, away from the highest stress load paths. You don't put the irreplaceable thing where the damage concentrates. You build around it. But that evening when he picked Maya up from the neighbor's apartment where she had spent the day, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, who watched her on days when Adam had things to do and whom Maya loved with the whole-body affection that children extend to people who give them their full attention. Maya ran to him the way she always did. Arms up, the wordless demand that he receive her, and he lifted her and held her and she put her chin on his shoulder and said, Did you do something good today, Daddy? It was something she asked regularly. He had told her once, during a conversation he barely remembered now, that doing something good every day was important. And she had absorbed this the way children absorb certain things completely, permanently as operational truth. And she asked about it the way she asked about weather or whether pigeons could smell. I think so, he said. I think I might have started something. What kind of something? Work, he said. Real work. He set her down and looked at her. She was examining his face with the 5-year-old's forensic intensity, reading the signals that no adult had taught her to read, but that she read anyway, because children are closer to their instincts than grown people usually remember. Whatever she saw in his face, she accepted it. She took his hand. Good, she said, with the decisive simplicity of someone who has never had reason to be otherwise, and they walked home together through the early dark, and Adam felt, for the first time in a long time, something that he was careful not to name yet. Careful. Because naming a thing before it is real is how men like him had been disappointed before. But he felt it anyway. The small, stubborn warmth of something that might be turning. What Adam did not know yet, what he could not have known from a single coffee meeting, was that Natalie Voss had not slept the night before. She had sat in the silence of her apartment and looked up everything there was to look up about Adam Wheeler, former senior associate at Carter Brigham Structural, holder of 3 professional certifications and 1 commendation from the city's engineering board in 2019. The commendation was for work on a public building that had subsequently survived a significant seismic event without structural compromise. Not because of luck, but because one man had understood exactly where the weakness was and reinforced it 3 years before the test came. The building stood. People had been inside it when the ground moved. They had walked out. That was what those hands had built. She had studied him. Not obsessively, but thoroughly. The way she approached any decision of consequence. She had also, somewhere between reviewing the commendation letter and closing her laptop, asked herself a question she had not expected to ask. When was the last time she had encountered a man who failed in front of her and did not ask her to fix it? Who accepted the damage, protected what mattered most, and walked out with his head straight? She had been counting backward through her memory for 20 minutes before she admitted that the answer was longer ago than she was comfortable with. She had 4 properties to assess. That was the stated reason. But reviewing her notes that evening, the leather folder open, the city quiet through the glass. She was beginning to understand that the properties were not really the point. The point was the commendation letter. The point was the building that stood. The point was discovering how much of what Adam Wheeler had once been was still present inside the man who put back the yogurt without a sound. And she suspected, with the instinct she had learned never to dismiss, that what she found was going to be considerably more than she was prepared for. The first property Natalie sent him to was a 1971 three-story commercial building on the east end of town, the kind of structure that generations of tenants had moved through without ever considering whether the walls holding them in were still doing what walls are supposed to do. It had been sold twice in the last decade, assessed once by a firm Adam had never respected, and was currently home to a dental office on the ground floor, a small accounting practice on the second, and on the third, a nonprofit that ran an after-school tutoring program for low-income kids. Adam noted the tutoring program the way he noted everything relevant but did not allow himself to linger on it. The building did not care what was inside it. The physics were the same regardless. He arrived on a Monday at 8 in the morning with a clipboard, a laser level, a moisture meter, and a bag of tools that he had maintained with the same careful attention he gave to his truck and his boots and everything else that still needed to function. He had borrowed one piece of equipment, a specific kind of ultrasonic tester, from a man named Harris who had worked with him at Carter Brigham and who, when Adam called after 2 years of silence, had said without preamble, "About time. When do you need it?" That was the kind of friendship that didn't require maintenance. The kind that sits in the same place it was left regardless of how long you've been gone. Adam had not allowed himself to feel the weight of that until he was in the car with the equipment in the back and Maya dropped off at Mrs. Chen's, and even then he only allowed it for a moment before he put it somewhere he could return to later. He spent 4 hours on the building before writing a single word. He walked every floor. He opened every access panel he could find. He lay on the ground in the basement with a flashlight and looked at the foundation at the angle where the vertical load met the horizontal earth, because that was where the truth of old buildings usually lived. Not in the walls you could see, but in the connections you couldn't. He tapped. He measured. He pressed his palm flat against concrete and let the building tell him things in the language of resonance and resistance that it had been accumulating since 1971, and that no one had properly listened to in a very long time. There was a discipline to this that he had missed in a way he had not let himself acknowledge during the 2 years of driving and demolition work. Not just the knowledge of it, but the physical attention it required, the specific combination of patience and precision that this kind of work demanded, and that had always felt, to him, more like a form of respect than a job. What he found was this. The building was not in crisis, but it was in the early stages of a conversation with gravity that would, within the next 8 to 12 years, become a serious problem if not addressed. The northeast corner column was showing the first measurable signs of load redistribution, which meant the column itself was beginning to compensate for something it should not have to compensate for. The something was a foundation crack, hairline thin and invisible to a casual inspection, running 17 feet along the east wall below grade. It was exactly the kind of thing a rushed assessment missed. It was exactly the kind of thing Adam did not miss. He wrote his findings in the particular language of structural reports. Precise. Technical, without drama. But he also wrote in the summary section a plain language paragraph explaining what the findings meant in practical terms, because he had learned years ago that the most dangerous gap in his profession was the one between what engineers knew and what building owners understood. He had always bridged that gap. He considered it part of the job, not separate from it. A building owner who did not understand the risk could not act on it, which meant the risk simply continued, which meant the building continued its conversation with gravity without anyone intervening, which meant that someday, maybe someone inside the dental office or the accounting firm or the after-school tutoring program would be in the wrong place when the conversation reached its conclusion. He submitted the report 3 days after the assessment. Natalie called him the same afternoon. "I want you to look at the other 3, she said. "I assumed," Adam said. There was a brief silence on the line. "The firm that did the original assessment on the East Building, they told me it was sound." "It is sound," Adam said. "For now. For another few years depending on load patterns and moisture. I explained that in the report." "I read it twice," she said. And then after a pause that had a different texture than the others, "The plain language section. I appreciated that." Adam said nothing for a moment. "It's just part of the job," he said. He worked through the other 3 properties over the following 2 weeks, keeping a schedule that required him to be back by 4 each afternoon to pick up Maya from preschool. He had arranged this without telling Natalie, simply by structuring his days so that the commitment was invisible. He had gotten good at that, building the framework of his life around Maya in a way that required no explanation and asked nothing of anyone else. It was not martyrdom. He had thought about it carefully enough to be sure of that. It was just the architecture of the situation, the load paths of a single-parent life, and he had become a good enough engineer of it that most days it held without visible strain. Maya had begun asking about the work in the specific way she asked about things that interested her, repeatedly from different angles, circling the subject the way water circles a drain, not anxiously but with the patient, inevitable persistence of someone who intends to understand something completely. What did he do at the buildings? What did he look for? Did the buildings know he was coming? That last question he sat with longer than he usually sat with her questions. It was not a naive question, he realized. It was, in the compressed intuitive logic of a 5-year-old, actually a fairly profound one. Did the building know? Did the accumulation of stress and settlement and material fatigue constitute a kind of waiting? He had spent enough years with his hands on old structures to know that there was something that felt like knowledge in the way a building responded to careful attention. A quality of return, of information offered to someone willing to receive it. He didn't believe buildings were conscious, but he believed they were legible in the way that anything with a long history is legible to someone who knows how to read it. "No," he said finally. "But they tell you things anyway, once you know how to listen." "What do they say?" "They say where they're tired," he said, "and where they're still strong." Maya considered this with the gravity that 5-year-olds reserve for things that seem important. "Like people," she said. Adam looked at her. Sometimes she arrived at things that took other people decades, and she arrived at them the way she arrived at everything, directly, without ceremony, as though the distance between a question and its answer was simply a matter of traveling it. "Yeah," he said, "like people." On the Thursday of the 2nd week, while he was finishing the assessment on the 3rd property, a 1958 warehouse Natalie was considering converting to mixed-use residential, he heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Natalie herself standing in the middle of the empty ground floor, hands in the pockets of her coat, looking up at the ceiling the way people look at things they are trying to understand. "I didn't know you'd be here," Adam said. "I own it," she said simply. "I wanted to see it the way you see it." "How do you think I see it?" She looked around slowly. "Like something that can be saved," she said. Then she looked at him. "Is it? Can it be saved?" Adam followed her gaze up to the ceiling, then across the walls, then down to the floor, taking the whole room in the way he always did, as a system, as a set of relationships between materials and forces and time. "Yes," he said. "But it'll cost more than they're probably telling you it will." "It always does," she said. "Then why ask?" "Because you're the first person who's told me the truth about it instead of the number they thought I wanted to hear." She said this without particular emphasis, as a simple statement of record. Then she looked back at the ceiling. "What's up there, in the rafters?" He spoke for 11 minutes. Because he had developed the habit of tracking explanation time to make sure it served the building rather than his own knowledge of it. When he finished, Natalie looked at him. "You love this," she said. It was not a question, and it landed somewhere unexpected. Adam looked at the rafters. "Yeah," he said. "I do." He did not look at her when he said it because it was a private thing and he was not accustomed to having private things witnessed. But he felt in the particular silence that followed that she had understood something. Not about the building, but about him. Not the version of him that took the bus to demolition sites at 5 in the morning and ate cold oatmeal over a kitchen sink. The earlier version, the one on the beam. And that understanding, offered without comment, without performance, without any suggestion that it required anything from him in return, was the most unsettling gift that had come his way in a very long time, because he had not known he needed it until it arrived. It was Natalie's attorney who found it first. His name was Marcus Webb, 61 years old, former federal prosecutor turned real estate counsel. He did not trust things he had not personally verified. Over 3 weeks of working with Adam on the property assessments, he had developed a professional respect that he expressed to Natalie in 3 words. He's the real thing. Coming from Marcus Webb, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Marcus found something unexpected in the public record during routine due diligence. He called Natalie on a Friday evening, not his habit. "You need to sit down," he said, also not his habit. She sat down. He told her what he'd found. She was quiet for a long moment after he finished. "Does he know we know?" Marcus said he did not believe so. "Good," she said. "I want to talk to him myself." She met Adam the following Monday, not at a coffee shop this time, but at the warehouse on Fillmore Street, the one he had been using as a base while he finished the final documentation on the 4th property. He was at a folding table with his laptop and his notes spread in the organized way of someone who had always worked in physical spaces and had never lost the habit of making those spaces legible. Every document in a specific place, every measurement annotated, the whole thing telling the story of the building in the same way the building itself told the story of the forces that had shaped it. "I need to ask you something," Natalie said, and her voice had a quality it didn't usually have. Not softness exactly, gravity, the weight of someone who is about to say a thing that changes the shape of the room. Adam looked up from the table. He waited. "In 2016, she said, there was a building collapse in the Merchant District. A 4-story residential, 12 units, 22 people inside. The room changed. Not visibly. Adam's expression did not change, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted, became more deliberate. The way a man's posture changes when he braces for something he has been carrying the weight of for a long time, and has never been asked to set down. "I know about it," he said. "Tell me," Natalie said. He told her. He had never told anyone the full account. Not his mother, not Harris, not anyone. He had answered every question put to investigators honestly and completely, then put it away in the part of himself where things go that are too heavy to carry forward and too important to discard. He told Natalie now because she had asked without accusation, simply with the direct attention of someone who wanted the truth. In 2015, Adam had been assigned to review the structural documents for a residential conversion in the Merchant District, a Grayfield capital project, led by a man named Daniel Corinth who moved fast and kept attorneys close. Adam found 3 significant deficiencies, genuine structural inadequacies that, in the seismic profile of that district, created real and calculable risk. He documented them formally. He submitted them through proper channels. He followed up twice in writing, and once in a meeting where Corinth's project manager told him the issues had been addressed in a revised plan Adam was never given access to. The building passed its final inspection 6 months later, conducted by a different engineer. Adam assumed the issues had been resolved. He moved to his next project. In March of 2016, on a Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m., the building's northeast corner failed. Partial collapse. The geometry and the age of the materials gave 22 people enough time to evacuate before the secondary collapse followed. 4 were injured. No one died. The margin between that outcome and a different one was, by every subsequent engineering assessment, somewhere between very narrow and miraculous. The investigation concluded that the primary cause was a foundation drainage issue inadequately addressed in the conversion design. Adam's 3 flagged deficiencies were in the record. His documentation was entered as evidence. The revised plan Corinth's project manager had referenced had never been formally filed. Corinth settled with the tenants. The other engineer lost his license for 2 years. Corinth was never charged, because the documentation gap was attributed to administrative error, and because his attorneys were considerably more expensive than the investigators' resolve. Adam was formally cleared. His documentation was described in the investigation's final report as exemplary, the standard against which the other submissions should be measured. He had flagged the problems. He had followed the process. The process had failed, not him. But 22 people had been inside that building when the corner came down, and Adam Wheeler had known for a year it had a problem, and formal exoneration could not reach the layer beneath the professional one, the human layer, where a man who understood what he knew and what happened anyway simply had to carry the weight of it. He had been carrying it for 9 years alone, without ever setting it down in front of anyone. He finished talking and looked at the table. The warehouse was quiet around them, the sound of traffic distant, the afternoon light coming through the clear story windows at the angle he had already measured and annotated in his notes. Natalie did not speak immediately. She sat with what he had told her the way someone sits with a thing that requires sitting with, not processing it toward a response, but simply receiving it, giving it the space that it had never been given by anyone who heard it before. "The reason I know about the building," she said finally, "is that one of the 22 people who evacuated that night was my father's property manager. He broke 2 ribs in the second collapse." She paused. "My father sued Corinth. He was one of the minority investors in the project. He lost." Another pause, shorter. "The file I found in the due diligence records, your submission. Your 3 deficiencies, flagged a year before the collapse, documented perfectly, completely ignored." She looked at him directly. "You tried to stop it." Adam said nothing. "I want you to know," Natalie said, with a precision that suggested she had been choosing these words for a while, "that what I'm offering you, the consulting work, and whatever comes after it, is not charity, it is not pity. It is a business decision made by someone who looked at the full record of what you are and concluded that the market has been radically, catastrophically wrong about your value for the past 2 years, and I intend to correct that error." Adam was quiet for a long time. He was not processing what she had said. He understood it immediately. He was sitting with the specific experience of being seen, fully seen. Not the version of himself he presented to the world, but the actual man underneath. The one who had done everything right and watched it go wrong anyway, and had been carrying that weight alone for 2 years, without once suggesting the world owed him a different outcome. It is a particular kind of loneliness, being a man who does the right thing and then has to live in the silence where the acknowledgement should be. Being seen, after a very long time of being invisible, required a moment of its own. He gave it that moment. "There's something else," Natalie said. Her voice had changed slightly again. "Marcus found something else in the record, something I don't think you know about." Adam looked at her. "Daniel Corinth filed for bankruptcy protection 14 months ago," she said. "Part of the dissolution of his assets included the release of certain internal communications that had been under attorney-client privilege. Those communications were added to the public record." She opened the leather folder. She placed 3 printed pages on the table in front of him. "These are emails between Corinth and his project manager, dated 3 weeks after your formal submission of the 3 deficiencies." She pointed to a specific line. "That is Corinth's instruction to his project manager to," and I'm quoting directly, "route the Wheeler comments to legal and hold them out of the active file." He knew. He had been told specifically what you found, and he made the deliberate decision to suppress it. Adam read the emails. He read them slowly, the way he read structural documents with the specific attention of someone who understands that the meaning lives in the details. When he finished, he set them down carefully on the table. He did not speak for another long moment. "He suppressed them," Adam said. His voice was exactly the same as it always was. Quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who has absorbed an enormous impact and is deciding where to put it. "He suppressed them," Natalie confirmed. "And because of the bankruptcy proceedings, those communications are now part of the formal public record. Marcus believes, and he's rarely wrong about these things, that the original investigation could be formally reopened on the basis of this new evidence, and that Corinth could face charges he did not face the first time." She looked at him. "If someone chose to pursue it." Adam looked at the pages on the table for a long time. Then he looked at the windows, at the angle of the afternoon light, at the Douglas fir rafters above them that were partly damaged and partly magnificent and entirely worth saving. Then he looked at Natalie. "I have to pick up my daughter at 4, he said. Natalie nodded. "Then we have time," she said. And the conversation that followed was the one that changed everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the slow and irreversible way that things change when the truth, long buried, finally finds the surface. Aman's legacy is not what the world remembers about him. It is what his child carries forward. That is the only monument that matters. The formal complaint was filed 6 weeks later through Marcus Webb's office, with supporting documentation that included Adam's original submission, his follow-up correspondence, the meeting notes, and the newly released internal communications from the Corinth bankruptcy proceedings. It was, Marcus said, one of the cleaner cases he had put together in 40 years of practice. Not clean, in the sense of simple, but clean in the sense of honest. The way a well-built structure is clean, everything load-bearing visible, nothing decorative obscuring the actual function. Adam did not hire Marcus. Marcus filed pro bono without consulting Natalie and announced it to her as a fact. Some things, he told her, you do because they're right. Natalie looked at him and said nothing, which was how she responded to things that moved her when she didn't want to show it. The process was not fast. Legal processes never are, and Adam had been an adult long enough to know that justice, when it arrives, rarely arrives with the dramatic speed of things designed for entertainment. It moves the way buildings move under load, slowly, incrementally, in increments so small that each one seems almost nothing, and only the accumulated measurement reveals the distance traveled. He had learned to be a patient man. He had been practicing that particular skill for 2 years on a pull-out couch with a bar in the middle. In the weeks between the filing and the first official response, Adam worked. He worked with the focus of a man who has been given back the thing that defines him and is not going to waste it by looking sideways. He completed the 4 property assessments. Natalie's structural contractor described the reports when she shared them for review as the best documentation he had seen on comparable properties in 20 years. Adam noted this without reaction. He was not working for the praise. He was working because the buildings needed it and because he was the right person to do it, and because being good at something and being allowed to do it was one of the closest things to peace that existed. He also, in those weeks, began to talk to Maya differently. Not more. They had always talked, in the particular rhythm of a father and daughter who spent most of their time in each other's company, and had developed the conversational texture of people who had negotiated shared space down to a fine art. But differently. He began, very slowly, to let her into more of it. The work, the buildings. The fact that something important was happening that he couldn't fully explain yet, but that was real, and that she had something to do with it. Not by doing anything, but simply by being the thing he had held himself together for during the 2 years when holding together had been the only viable option. He did not tell her about Corinth. She was 5. There was a version of that story for her, but it was years away. What he told her was that he had found work he loved, that it helped keep buildings safe for the people inside them, that sometimes things went wrong for a long time before they went right. And the going wrong was not the end. Maya listened, then asked, "Is it going right now?" Adam said, "Yeah, Bug. I think it is." She nodded once, with the decisive finality that was her highest form of approval, then went back to drawing. He watched her draw and felt the particular gratitude of a man who has been at the bottom of something and found, against his own expectations, the floor. Gerald Holt was still the manager of the grocery store on Birch and 10th when Adam walked back in, 12 weeks after the morning with the conveyor belt. He walked in on a Tuesday, which was where this had all started, and he walked in with Maya, which was also where it had started. And he went to the same register, Linda's register, and he put things on the belt. Different things this time, more of them. And he paid for all of them, including 1 container of strawberry yogurt, without incident and without drama, because buying groceries was not a dramatic act and he had never wanted it to be one. Linda recognized him. He could see it in the slight recalibration of her expression. Not guilt exactly, but the acknowledgement that recognition carries. She scanned his items. She gave him his total. He paid. She handed him his receipt. And then she said quietly in the voice of someone who has been wanting to say a thing for a while, "I'm sorry. About before. I don't know what I should have done, but I'm sorry." Adam looked at her. She was sincere, he could tell. He had a good instinct for sincerity, forged in years of reading buildings and the people who built them and the gaps between what people said and what they meant. "It's okay," he said. "You were doing your job." He meant it. He had thought about it enough to mean it. Linda was not the story. Linda had never been the story. Gerald Holt appeared from the direction of the back office at that moment, drawn by whatever managerial instinct drew him to registers. And he saw Adam and he stopped. There was a beat, a brief, visible moment of computation, and then Gerald said, with the slightly over-careful courtesy of a man who has learned that something has changed, without being told precisely what, "Mr. Wheeler, good to see you in." Adam looked at him. "Gerald," he said, not warmly, not coldly, accurately, the tone of a man who has no grievance left to nurse and no performance to give, who has simply arrived at the place on the other side of the thing that happened and is standing in it without rancor and without pretense. Then he picked up his bags and took Maya's hand and walked out. The formal outcome arrived 4 months after the filing. Corinth was charged with 2 counts of willful suppression of safety-relevant documentation, charges carrying civil penalties, and the permanent revocation of his contractor's license. His attorneys negotiated as they always did, but certain documents cannot be argued past. Only through, and the distance through them was longer than Corinth's resources could sustain. Adam was not in the room when the decision came through. He was at a building on the west side, standing on the 4th floor of a 1964 apartment complex that Natalie had recently acquired, looking at a set of steel moment frames that had been installed in 1987 and that were, in his professional judgment, significantly better than anyone had told her they were. He was thinking about how to write that in a way that conveyed the good news without suggesting that the building's other issues were less serious than they were, which was the particular tightrope of honest assessment. When his phone rang. Marcus Webb. Short call. 3 sentences. Adam stood at the window after the call ended, looking out at the city, the street grid, the buildings, the geometry of a place built by people who had made calculations about weight and load and the relationship between the ground and everything resting on it. He had given his life to understanding that relationship. He had been right about the Merchant District building. He had been right about all of it. For 2 years, the world had acted as though none of that was true, and now the record was being corrected. He called Natalie. "I heard," she said, before he spoke. "How do you feel?" He thought about it, honestly, without the reflexive deflection. "Like the building stood," he said. Natalie was quiet. Then, "Good. That's the right feeling." 6 months after the morning in the grocery store, Adam Wheeler signed a full-time consulting contract with Voss Properties. Not charity, a professional contract at a professional rate, with specific deliverables reflecting exactly what Adam was capable of and what Natalie had concluded she needed. She had other engineers. Adam was not a replacement, but an addition. The kind a portfolio makes when it acquires someone who understands the hidden life of buildings. Who knows where the weakness lives before it becomes catastrophic? He moved Maya to a 2-bedroom apartment 3 months into the contract. The new place had a room unambiguously hers, and a bedroom unambiguously his, and a kitchen window looking out over a courtyard where an elm tree had been growing since before either of them was born. He put the photograph, Adam at 27, on the steel skeleton, one hand on the column, on the windowsill, in the same cracked plastic frame, repaired with the same drop of superglue, in the same position relative to the window. Some things you move with you not because they're practical but because they are the record of the man you were, and the man you are still becoming. And that distance should not be put in a box. Maya walked into the new kitchen on the first morning and found the photograph in its place and looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her father. Then she looked at the photograph again. Then she said, "Daddy, you were very high up." Exactly what she had said before. The same words, the same tone. As if she were asking it for the first time because this was a new place and a new morning and the question deserved to be asked again in every room they stood in together. "I was," Adam said. "Were you scared?" He looked at the photograph, then at her. At her yellow raincoat, hung on its hook by the door because she still wore it most days and he had long since stopped arguing. At the yogurt in the refrigerator, visible through the open door, the same brand, the same flavor, bought without ceremony or significance at the same store on Birch and 10th, on a Tuesday morning a week ago, when it had simply been a thing she wanted, and he had simply been able to give it to her. "Not up there," he said. "Never up there." She nodded with the decisive finality that he loved, and took his hand, and they went to look out the window at the elm tree in the courtyard, which was old and large and had survived things neither of them would ever know about and was still, on this particular morning, standing. End. Some men are buried by the world, some are buried and dig themselves out, and some, the rare kinds, are buried, dig out, and say nothing about it. They just show up. They do the work, they hold their child's hand, and the world eventually has to look at them and remember who they always were.